Double lines. Positive. I dropped the pregnancy test to the ground and tried to crush it with my foot. When it didn't even crack, I grabbed it and threw it in the trash instead. But nothing could erase the horrible fact that I was pregnant from my brain. This was the second test I'd taken. There was no disputing it. On my phone, I looked at pictures of the 18th birthday I had just celebrated. My secret boyfriend Joseph and I had exchanged sweet selfies, but now those pictures looked distorted. Backing out of my gallery, I checked for a reply from Joseph. I had sent him a message right asking him to call me. I said I needed to talk to him. Only my own message stared back at me. Just like every time I'd checked before, the double check marks proved he read the message, but he hadn't replied. I kept waiting. I had no one else I could talk to. As a werewolf, my inner wolf would not appear until I turned 19, so I couldn't yet consult that part of myself. My older brother Dylan was the only family member I felt close to. But he was overprotective. If he knew about this, he'd probably be on the first flight home from Silver Moon Academy, where he was spending a semester as an exchange student. I couldn't tell my oldest sister, the perfect and beautiful Luna. The family's favorite. If I confided in her, she'd tell Mom in a second, and I could never tell my parents. I tried so firm to keep them happy and satisfied, only bothering them when I had achievements to share. I doubted they would graciously accept me being pregnant, since I might have to give up so much. I enrolled in Lunar Haven Academy, the best private elite school in the kingdom, as a cheerleader because I excelled at dance. I loved to dance, and practiced firm to earn my chance at the academy. Now that I was pregnant, would I have to give up dancing? Would I have to drop out of the academy? Joseph had to answer my message. Why wasn't he answering? I didn't want to be alone in this. Lightning flashed outside, but I needed to know what Joseph thought. Now, without further thought, I flew from my room, down the stairwell, and out the door into the rain. Since Joseph and I were only secretly together, I had never used the front door, so I avoided it now. Instead, I rounded the building to the side entrance I always used to sneak in and out. This time, however, when I pulled on the metal handle, the door wouldn't budge. I tried yanking as firm as I could, but it was no use. The door was locked. Joseph had been adamant that I never use the front door, but surely he would forgive me under these conditions. As a star soccer player, Joseph lived in one of the separate athletes' dormitories. Rather than the single-bed, shared bathroom dorms where I stayed. These were elaborate villas. Each room had their own kitchenette and personal bathroom. Each athlete was seen as elite. They were popular on campus, even with the faculty and staff. With that popularity came privilege and preference. Fancy dorms were only the start of the gifts they received. I had always been proud of Joseph for all that his soccer skills helped him achieve. He was someone Mom would adore. Now I cursed it a little, if only because a superintendent stopped me before I even got through the door. Nearby, I heard the bass of loud music and distant laughter. "I'm looking for Joseph," I explained. Stuck outside, cold rain continued to pelt down on me. The superintendent wasn't much taller than me, but the way she sneered down her nose at me made me feel small. "Joseph is in his room," the superintendent said. "He asked not to be disturbed. It's important, Tiny. It's getting late, isn't it?" The superintendent gripped the door with both hands, as if ready to aggressive confrontation. It closed. "Shouldn't you be returning to your own dorm? Maybe I could try the side door again. If I waited, someone might come and I'd be able to sneak inside." Yet before I could act, movement shifted at the edge of my vision. I glanced down the hall and saw a tall, handsome man storm toward me. I would recognize that dark, windswept hair and piercing gaze anywhere. Asher. My brother's best friend, one of the very last people I'd hoped to see. If he discovered I was pregnant, undoubtedly he would tell Dylan. I was no way ready for that to happen. Especially not before I spoke to Joseph. Asher's intense eyes weighed heavy on me, taking in my full person head to toe. When he looked back to my face, those eyes darkened further. This hint of anger was the only emotion on his perfect blank slate of a face. I knew Asher didn't like me. I'd met him several times with Dylan, and each time he'd only given one-word responses to my attempts at friendly conversation. He never once returned my smile. Actually, I'd never seen him smile at all. Inching backwards, I told the superintendent, "Maybe I can come back tomorrow." Too slow. Asher came straight for us. He stopped just behind the superintendent. When he spoke, his voice was deep with disdain. "What do you think you are doing?" I lowered my face. Not you, Cynthia," he said. Looking up, I realized he was glaring directly at the superintendent, who shifted nervously under the ire of that gaze. "Is she a friend of yours, Asher?" the superintendent asked sweetly. Her entire demeanor had changed talking to him. Asher narrowed his eyes. "She is a girl, soaked through in the rain." "Is that not reason enough to let her inside?" the superintendent sputtered. The rules. "Step back, please," Asher said. The superintendent moved to the side, and Asher, catching the door, held it open for me. I quickly slinked in beside him, escaping the rain. Under Asher's continued stare, the superintendent apologized before hurrying away. When she was gone, Asher turned to me. His firm look softened. "What are you doing here?" I couldn't tell him the truth. I had two secrets to hide: my pregnancy and my dating Joseph, neither of which I wanted Dylan to know about. So I hesitated. He waited for a while. In silence, when it was clear that I wasn't going to say anything, he began, "Would you like to come to?" His voice trailed. As I watched, his gaze traveled down my front, and then quickly away. In a flash, he unzipped his sweatshirt jacket and handed it to me. At that moment, I shivered. Adrenaline had gotten me this far. Asher had seen, so would many others, if I didn't cover up. I snatched the jacket from his hands and quickly pulled it around me. It was big on me, but soft and warm. It smelled nice too. "Thank you," I said. Asher curtly nodded, and then cleared his throat. "The hockey team is having an after-party in the lounge. Would you want to join us?" I looked at him, confused. Asher was being nice. Didn't he hate me? Chapter 1 has come to a close. Please stay with us as we read through the rest of this story. If you are watching, please give us a like and leave a comment telling us where you are tuning in from. Now, let's continue listening. 2 months prior, my brother Dylan had introduced me to Asher. Dylan had been about to leave for his semester abroad. "Asher's my best friend," Dylan had told me. Turning to Asher, he said, "I need you to take care of Cynthia for me while I'm gone." I bristled with annoyance. Dylan was so overprotective. He always treated me like a little kid. "Dylan, I'm an adult now. I can take care of myself." Dylan gave me a soft smile. "Maybe, but you'll always be my little sister. You can't blame me for worrying about you. You don't need to worry about me." Dylan opened his mouth to speak, but Asher cut him off. "I will take care of her," Asher said like a vow. The tension in Dylan's shoulders eased. "Good, that's a relief. Thank you." Neither man seemed eager to listen to me. Asher had only barely glanced at me the whole time. I'd heard of Asher even before meeting him. His cold, standoffish reputation preceded him. I had no idea how he and Dylan, always warm and smiling, came to be such good friends. Regardless, I purposefully avoided Asher since that moment, and he'd seemed content to keep his own distance. But now, standing in the hallway, I was snared in his attention. And his off-brand kindness. I couldn't help but be surprised by his jacket and his invitation to the party. I had always assumed he would take care of me only out of obligation. The jacket could have been that. But the party, too, strange. Thank you for that, I said. But I have a few things of my own to take care of. Perhaps later. He made a soft humming sound. Do you need help with whatever you are doing? No. I said quickly. The last thing I needed was Asher to shadow me outside Joseph's door. He nodded, accepting my refusal, though didn't seem particularly happy about it. A small line split his brow. Was he worried? Was that possible? I'll stop by the party afterwards. I didn't want him to worry if that was what was happening. Some of his tension slipped away. Good. He looked at me again, holding my gaze long enough for my breath to catch. He was undeniably handsome. His blue-eyed gaze was icy and intense, his features chiseled and masculine. As captain of the hockey team, he was a muscled mass of wide shoulders and strong torso that tapered into a narrow waist. He looked like he walked straight out of a men's fitness magazine. Though I'd avoided him these past few months, I had heard what the girls said about him behind his back. He was popular and powerful. Outwardly he appeared cold and arrogant, but his behavior to me made me wonder if that assessment was unfair. I should go now, I said, struggling to want to pull myself away from him. Maybe because of his connection to Dylan, or maybe because of his unexpected kindness. But I felt safer standing near him. Like he was my shield, ready to protect me from the rest of the world. How odd to think that about someone I only just met. Still, I came here for a purpose. And that purpose was sitting in his dorm room 2 floors up. Asher didn't say goodbye. He just nodded. I suppose that was dismissal enough, though I would have preferred to hear his voice again. As I walked to a familiar stairwell through an unfamiliar hall, I felt the weight of his gaze follow me. When I disappeared from his line of sight, I sighed. From here, I knew the way to Joseph's room by heart. Up 2 flights of stairs, and 3 doors down. I lifted my hand to knock, but stopped the instant I heard noises from inside. The blood drained from my face. This couldn't be what it sounded like. Maybe he was just watching porn or something tine. Oh, Joseph! Cried the same moaning voice. The air punched from my lungs. No, this couldn't be right. Joseph had a solid reputation as a popular future alpha. He was a center forward on the soccer team and never missed a practice. He held doors open for women, and everyone said how much of a gentleman he was. With me, he had always whispered soft, sweet words in my ear when we were together. He'd complimented my looks and my body, and sometimes he'd say how much he wanted to keep me wrapped up like a present just for him. Until today, he'd returned all my messages, usually including lots of text hearts. There was no way he could be doing the same with other women, that he could be sleeping with them. I knew Joseph didn't lock his door, so I went for the handle and pushed it open. A dim table light illuminated the large space, bright enough for me to see the tangled sheets of the bed's city, and the 2 figures entwined under them. My stomach dropped to the floor. Joseph! It couldn't be him. It had to be some other guy who looked just like him, who had borrowed his room. Joseph wouldn't do this to me. The couple stilled, the girl gasping, snatched at the sheet to hide her exposed breasts. Joseph rolled away from her and up onto his feet beside the bed. Grabbing the comforter, he wrapped it around his waist. Joseph ran a hand over his face, wiping sweat from his brow. You can't just be walking in here, Joseph, I whispered again, chest aching. There had to be some explanation for this. Joseph's hand dropped, He looked at me as if noticing me for the first time, and with that recognition, anger followed. His brow lowered. "Cynthia, what are you doing here?" That was Joseph's voice, his face, his body walking toward us. I couldn't deny what I was seeing any longer. While I was dealing with discovering my pregnancy, Joseph had been here, sleeping with another woman. He had seen my text. He had known I needed to talk to him, and still he chose to do this here. Now, like I didn't matter at all. "Is this why you didn't reply to me?" I asked. As the initial shock wore off, white-hot anger replaced it. Joseph rolled his eyes. "Don't try to ruin my fun, Cynthia." Fun. The word filled me with fury. While I was stressing and struggling thinking about the future, he was here having his fun, without a care in the world for me. How naive I'd been. To think he cared. When we first started dating, I had thought that with a person like Joseph beside me, I wouldn't need the protection and care of my family anymore. That I could finally concentrate on making myself feel happy, instead of focusing on everyone else. Now, I knew the truth. I'd met a scumbag who only wanted to take. He never cared about my happiness. "Go home, Cynthia," he said, voice cruel. "I'm so sick of clingy girls like you, watching me every second. Do you think you own me? You think you can tell me what I can and can't do? This vile snake, how dare he be so flippant? How dare he say these things to me?" Maybe it was the pregnancy hormones. Maybe it was my blinding anger. Either way, I reared back and spat at him. He blinked, too surprised to move. I took advantage of the moment to peer around him to the girl half hiding in his room. "Careful to get checked for STDs," I called to her, "and check the condoms for holes. You never know with someone like him." Joseph was slowly recovering. He wiped the spit from his cheek. "Cynthia, whatever you want to say, save it," I told him. "I've had enough of you. We're through." Joseph didn't try to stop me from leaving. I'm not sure what he thought. He just stared at me with a sort of flabbergasted look on his face as I gathered my dignity and left him behind. I felt righteous, empowered, almost like I could do anything. Maybe even raise this baby on my own. I wanted to keep the good feeling going. I wasn't ready to go home yet and face the reality of the world alone. Plus, I had promised Asher that I would go to his party to see him before I left. So I made my way back down to the first floor and then up the hallway, following the music to where the student lounge was located. Inside, a bunch of athletic students drank and talked. A DJ had set up a table at the far end of the room. Though people bobbed their heads in time with the music, no one danced yet. I spotted Asher right away. Not only was he one of the tallest in the room, but he was also surrounded by a crowd. He watched someone as they talked to him, but seemed in no hurry to reply. The person didn't appear to mind, almost like having Asher's ear was as good as anything. I knew better. His voice was well worth hearing. I waited near the entrance of the room, unsure where I belonged in this mix. I recognized some of the people here, but they likely didn't know me, some newbie cheerleader. But then, Asher looked back at me, and I was caught in the blue ocean of his gaze. He crossed the room, masterfully weaving through the crowd around him, and approached me. When he stopped in front of me, he looked me up and down as if making sure I was okay. Then he gazed into my eyes. He seemed to be waiting for something. Did he want me to verbalize that I was fine? What would I even say? Instead, I just nodded, and that seemed to be enough for him. He nodded back. Then, he held out a hand. "Dance with me." I tilted my head, confused. He wanted to. Asher never volunteered to dance. That was well known across campus. I was surprised, but an offer like that I couldn't turn down. I placed my hand in his and let him lead me to the dance floor. The DJ must have seen us coming, because suddenly, the fast tempo song ended and a slower one began. Asher pulled me closer, and I went willingly, pressing against his strong chest. One of his arms slid around my waist. He held my hand with the other, holding it over his heart. Then we started moving, swaying in an unhurried circle. Some of the girls around us peered at us with jealousy burning in their eyes. I didn't understand their firm feelings. I wasn't anything to Asher's Sudi Tandy, just a nuisance kid sister of his friend. Yet, he held me with incredible gentleness, as if I was someone worth protecting. I couldn't help but feel safe in his arms. With him here, I closed my eyes, relaxing into the feeling. Tonight had been a whirlwind of emotion, but this was a calming space. I could regroup, recharge. Too soon, the song ended, and I slipped from Asher's hold. I immediately felt colder. Even wrapped up in his jacket, the man himself was like a furnace. "I will walk you home," he said. I shook my head. "Thank you, but I want to be alone." He seemed conflicted, but eventually nodded. With great regret, I backed away from him. When I made it outside, it wasn't raining anymore. In the safety of my dorm room, I tossed my damp clothes into a corner and changed into soft pajamas. I cried softly, but refused to let myself fully fall apart. Despite what I had seen, I still needed to talk to Joseph about the pregnancy. He didn't deserve much, but he should know the truth. "Joseph, I'm pregnant, but I have no intention of letting you back into my life." With that message sent, I felt a modicum of satisfaction. Yet the longer I sat there in the quiet, alone, the less I was sure what to do next. I still wanted to talk to someone. My thoughts returned to my family. I couldn't talk to Mom, or my sister, or Dylan. Wildly, I considered Asher too. But how could I possibly burden him with this? My cousin Nancy was a nurse at the maternity hospital. If anyone would know what to do, she would. And while we weren't exactly best friends, we were close enough that I believed she might keep my secret. I dialed her number. "Cynthia." Nancy's kind voice came through the phone, and I let out a relieved breath. What's wrong? The weight of the secret had been swelling inside of me all day, and it bubbled out now, breaking the dam I'd built to hold it. I told Nancy everything about Joseph and the pregnancy. I ended with, please don't tell anyone. Don't tell Mom. Our family wouldn't understand." "I won't," Nancy promised. She knew as well as me how conservative our family was about pregnancy. If they knew I had gotten pregnant, they would never forgive me. "And this guy, Joseph," Nancy said. "He's a jerk," I said. "He's not willing to step up." "In that case, let's focus on what you want," Nancy said. "You have options." My hands trembled around the phone. I didn't know what I wanted when I thought of the future I had dreamed for myself. Having a baby so young didn't really fit. I'd been confident talking to Joseph, but alone. I didn't know. Maybe I shouldn't have it. My voice was so small, I barely recognized myself. Nancy's tone was gentle. It's not uncommon for student mothers to choose difficult choice regarding her path. The next morning, I sat in the waiting room of maternity hospital's surgery wing, waiting for my number to be called. If I didn't have the baby, my life could more or less go back to the way things were before. I could throw myself entirely into dancing and cheerleading. I wouldn't have to live under the heavy weight of uncertainty about what I would do with my life. If I had this baby, I would lose absolutely everything. My parents wouldn't want to have anything to do with me. I'd be a black mark on the family. They'd undoubtedly refuse to continue paying my expensive school fees, and I'd have to drop out. I couldn't let that happen. I had to go through with the difficult choice regarding her path. I sunk into my chair, trying to clear my head. thinking too much about it created cracks in my resolve, and I couldn't allow any more doubt. Suddenly, a door opened, and a woman accompanied by a nurse was led into the hallway. Tears streaked down the woman's face. She held a tissue but didn't use it. She moved slowly, as if in a trance. The nurse guided her past the neonatal delivery room, and the woman nearly dropped to her knees. The nurse called for others to come help. One offered the woman a sedative. Nancy had warned me of this. During our phone conversation, she'd carefully asked if I had felt bonded to the baby. If the wolf within the mother has already begun to feel an attachment, the procedure can be dangerous, Nancy had explained. It can be difficult for the wolf to understand. The woman accepted the sedative. The nurses helped her into a wheelchair and rolled her further down the hall. I rubbed my hand over my belly. My stomach remained mostly flat yet, but I noticed now that some of my weight sat differently than before. It almost seemed like I ate too much, but I knew the truth. I was starting to show. A baby was in there. I could almost feel them. A small warmth blossomed in my chest. A baby. My baby. A nurse at the check-in counter called a number. I looked at the slip in my hand. The number was mine. I'm sorry. I couldn't do this. I had to get out. I don't know what I'm doing here. I shouldn't be here. I crumpled the paper offering me a way out and tossed it aside. I turned to leave. Outside, with the hospital doors sliding closed behind me, I shut my eyes and finally allowed myself to breathe again. I was connected with my baby by some kind of almost spiritual bond. I could feel their presence growing inside of me. To purposefully cut that connection now, I wouldn't be able to recover. No, I would never get in difficult choice regarding her path. I couldn't, but there were other things I could do. When Nancy had spoken of options, one of them was adoption. With adoption, I could take my time considering it and work to find the right family for my baby. I wouldn't have to decide anything right now. My breathing came easier. Next, I opened a text to Joseph. I didn't want to talk to him, but I felt like he should know he was going to have a child in the world. I typed, "I'm going to have the baby." I hit send before I could regret it and clicked off the screen of my phone. The phone immediately buzzed in my hand. It was from Joseph. It read, "Come to my room as soon as you can. Let's talk." Joseph let me into his dorm room. I ignored looking at the bed, last night's hurt still raw within me. Instead, I kept my eyes on him. He closed the door and faced me, but his gaze avoided mine. He looked at the ceiling and then the floor, but never at me. Yet even with his shifty eyes, that he had invited me here at all felt like a step forward. It gave me the courage to ask, "Does this mean you want to help with our baby?" He huffed a sharp breath. Voice sharp as a dagger, he asked, "How can you be so sure it's mine?" I stood very still as the world blurred around me. I could only see him and the way he finally looked at me like I was a pest to be rid of. "How can you ask me that?" I asked, anger returning. Did he think because he was a cheater that I would be as well? He hugged his arms over his chest, clutching at his elbows. "Just having difficult choice regarding her path, Cynthia. You're young enough to have a quick recovery. It'll be like it never happened. Then you can have the kids you want later." "No," I said. "I tried to, but I can't." His face added disgust. Instinctively, I lifted my chin, defiant. "Can't or won't?" he asked. I didn't reply, and that seemed to confirm his worst assumptions. He said, his voice low now, "Predatory, you begged me for it. And now, what? You are trying to push this off on me." He unhooked his arms and held them down at his sides, taut as bowstrings, hands like claws. "What do you want from me, Cynthia? Are you trying to blackmail me? No. I tied. Do you have any idea what would happen if word got out about this? To me. To you. If your brother knew, he would hate you. If the cheerleaders found out, you'd be kicked to the side. I could barely breathe from the fury that choked at my throat. How could I never have noticed that Joseph was so full of bitter hatred? How could he ever think so low of me, that I would try to blackmail him? Why did it sound so much like he was trying to blackmail me? My baby deserved better than this. Then him. You don't to worry, I said. I'll take care of the baby on my own. You don't have to be involved, we won't bother you. He stepped closer to me. Every inch of his posture and his words felt like a threat. Anxiety began to curdle in my stomach. You're still going to have it. He spat out the words. I nodded. You were only ever trying to steal my asterisk, weren't you? He shouted. His eyes were wild and dangerous. I'd never seen anyone so furious. I clawed at his wrists, trying to loosen his hold. He only gripped firmer. After an alpha's son, weren't you? Any would do to fuck a kid into you. Then you'd soak up the reward, right? Guaranteed money and glory because you trapped me with your damn asterisk. He was so angry. I half expected him to shift into his wolf at any moment. My own wolf had not yet appeared to me, but I could feel her in the low whimpering in my throat. I slid my hands from his wrists down around my waist to cover my belly. I wanted to fight back, but I couldn't risk it. I couldn't do much of anything like this, but I would give all I had to protect my baby. You don't deserve to bear my blood, he yelled in my face. Suddenly, a sharp, visceral hatred sparked within me for this man. I thought I knew hatred before, but that had been nothing compared to this. He dared Joseph threaten me. More, how dare he threaten my child? He released my shirt, and my back hit the floor. His hands found my shoulders instead. His fingers dug deep into my skin, clutching my belly. I squeezed my eyes shut. Get away from her! A feral voice roared from the doorway. In an instant, Joseph was ripped from atop me and sent flying into the wall. He landed on his desk and rolled onto the floor. A pair of strong arms curled around me and plucked me from the floor into a bridal carry. I was held against a muscled chest and looked up into the piercing eyes of my savior. Asher. I blinked, but he didn't disappear. He was really here. I didn't understand. He was aloof, cold as an iceberg, and distant. Yet here he was, arriving just in time as if I dreamed him. On the ground, Joseph stirred, groaning. Looking at him, Asher growled deep in his throat. I could feel it vibrating where my hand pressed against his chest. Asher held me closer. He cradled my body gently, like I was someone precious. Someone fragile. I glanced over his shoulder to the door. It had been kicked in with such force, the wood had splintered. Chunks of it littered the floor. Asher must have been furious to do that kind of damage. What could have triggered him to use his werewolf strength? At once, the blood drained from my face so fast. I felt lightheaded. Joseph had been yelling. You don't deserve to bear my blood. How much? Had Asher overheard? Without another word to Joseph, Asher carried me out of the room, down the stairwell, and into his own room. He simply held me for a moment. His pulse was quick, his eyes wild. The longer he carried me, the more he seemed to relax. In the safety of his arms, I was relaxing, some too. I couldn't believe he had rushed to my rescue. Though I worried over what he had heard, his timing had been nothing short of miraculous. How had he known I was there? Had he been keeping an eye on Joseph? Had he heard me crying? Honestly, I wasn't sure I truly wanted any of the answers to those questions. At least, not right now, while I was still trembling. You are safe, he whispered to me, and I nearly sobbed in relief. I didn't, though. I wouldn't break down here, no matter how tempting Asher's warmth and comfort. I steeled myself against the feelings, slowly. Asher lowered me down to my feet. His hands lingered on my shoulders. He brushed his thumbs lightly over tears of my shirt, where Joseph's fingers had marred my skin with bruises. The air between us felt charged. The silence was thick. "Are you pregnant with Joseph's baby?" He likely already knew. To deny it now would only make things worse. "Yes." He exhaled slowly, as if trying to keep himself calm. "Why didn't you tell me?" I stepped back from him. Out of his reach, he let his arms drop. "Why would I tell you?" I asked. "None of this concerns you." He stared at me for a long moment, and I shifted under the weight of his gaze. Then, he grabbed his phone from his back pocket. "What are you doing?" I asked at once, panicked. "Texting Dylan," he said simply, like that didn't mean the end of my world. "Why? You don't have to do that." Asher's thumbs moved fast over the phone screen. "Dylan asked for updates on you." "I think this counts as a damn big update." "You can't." I jumped forward, reaching for his phone. He held it up high in the air, well above my head. "Asher, don't." His fingers paused. He glanced down at me. I knew I only had one chance to convince him. "If you tell him, he'll come back, and if he comes back, he could ruin his whole future. You know how firm he has worked to be a part of the exchange program. He'd want to know," Asher said flatly, "and with a reason like this, maybe he should come back." "No, please." I held my hands to my chest. I wasn't telling Asher the full truth. I didn't want to give voice to my truest fears. But if it would stop Asher, then I had to. If Dylan finds out, if he comes back, I closed my eyes and gathered my strength. He'll kill Joseph, or try to. And he won't just ruin his academic future, but his entire life. I could imagine it. Dylan's protective wolf tearing out of him, aggressive, confrontationing Joseph. If Asher was truly Dylan's best friend, he would know I spoke a frightening truth. Dylan was so protective of me that he'd kill for me. The quiet stretched. When I opened my eyes, Asher had lowered his phone. "I'll take care of it," he said. "You can't tell him." Asher huffed a sharp exhale. His gaze fell to the bruises on my shoulders. "Only if you promise not to see Joseph alone again." Relief flooded through me. "Okay." He returned his phone to his back pocket and turned from me. I rushed from his room before he could say anything else. Back in my dorm room, I paced again. I had found a moment of peace, but I knew it wouldn't last. I felt so helpless. With Asher in on my secret, who knew what he would do? He'd agreed not to tell Dylan for now. But what if he changed his mind? And then, there was Joseph. I was still reeling from his reaction. My shoulders ached, covering my face with my hands. I struggled to maintain any sense of calm. A knock on my door sent me jumping nearly out of my skin. I pulled myself together and went to the door. The boy behind it was an athlete I recognized from Joseph's dorm. He handed me an envelope with my name on it. It wasn't Joseph's handwriting. I sighed in relief, thanked the boy, and closed the door. Opening the envelope revealed an invitation to a party at the athletes' dorms, held the day after tomorrow. Scrawled along the bottom was a note addressed to me. "You won't want to miss this. 4D Asher." I didn't want to go to any party, but Asher didn't do things lightly. For him to write that note meant that he knew something. I'd be a fool to miss finding out. What? 2 days later, I arrived at the athletes' dorm for the party. I scanned the crowd and quickly found who I was looking for. I rushed across the room and met Asher near the drink table. "Asher, what is this about? You must know I don't have anything I want to celebrate." He tilted his head and started walking. I followed him to a more private corner of the room. I wanted to be angry about his silent treatment, but he leaned against the wall with a type of lazy confidence that disarmed me. He looked for all the world like he was in total control of everything around him. All I had to do was trust him. But trust didn't come easily to me at the moment. "Asher," I said, "what am I doing here? Look around." I wanted to say that I already had, but his expectant face had me holding my tongue. I looked around again, slower. The room was full of beautiful women with long legs and short skirts. A couple of them I recognized as fellow cheerleaders. Several more, I remembered their faces but not where I'd seen them before. The rest were strangers. Everyone talked and laughed, having a good time other than Asher. There wasn't a man in sight. "They're all girls," I said. Asher lifted a brow. "And what else do they have in common? Or should I say, what do they have in common with you? Certainly they weren't all pregnant, and only a few were dancers like me. No. There had to be something else that tied us together for Asher to mention it." Asher pushed off the wall, leaning over my shoulder instead. "Would you like a hint?" I had one growing suspicion, but I wasn't sure it was possible, or that Asher would take the time to arrange it. When I looked up at him, his lips twitched like he meant to smile but couldn't. "You guessed right." I hadn't said anything, but he must have seen it in the surprise on my face. "Look around, Cynthia," Asher said. "A flirt, a secret girlfriend. They're all here," he hummed, clearly satisfied with himself. Watching him, I didn't know what to think or what to expect. The firm edge in his eyes froze over, ice cold. "Every girl in this room is one of Joseph's conquests. How did you do all this?" I asked Asher. Asher shrugged. "Joseph uses the same weak password for all of his social media accounts. You'd think someone with so much to hide might have taken a bigger interest in security. Hacking in was child's play. It couldn't have been as simple as he made it seem. But his easy confidence made me wonder if he was capable of anything he set his mind to. He'd added a couple hundred girls on his socials, some from the academy, some not. Reading his messages, it was pretty clear that the girls didn't know about each other." Asher leaned against the wall, appearing relaxed except for the way his hands formed fists. "He likes to sneak around with naive girls that don't know any better," he said. "Is that how he thought of me?" "Navev. But then, maybe I was. Or at least I had been, before I had discovered the truth." I hugged my arms around my waist. "I didn't want to think about that. What are you really up to, Asher?" I asked. "What was the purpose of bringing us all together? Did he expect us to bond somehow? Make friendships? That seemed unlikely." "Just wait and see," he said, giving nothing away. Asher had promised Dylan to protect me. So far, he'd been dedicated to that promise. I didn't know what was going to happen tonight. But, if nothing else, I could trust Asher to keep me safe. So I moved to the wall by his side and tried to relax as much as I could. He inched a little closer to me, close enough that his arm brushed against mine. The warmth of him helped smooth any lingering knots in my stomach. Then, a few male athletes entered the room, followed by Joseph himself. One of the athletes nodded at Asher. A second pressed a drink into Joseph's hand. A third, behind Joseph, lifted a camera. Along the far wall, a screen unfurled. A projector clicked on, and an image appeared on the screen. No, a broadcast. The camera behind Joseph's shoulder now projected his every move. "I told him this party is for him," Asher said softly into my ear. "He thinks we're all here to celebrate his success." I watched on the screen as Joseph drank deeply from his plastic cup. After lowering it, he flashed a bright grin and saddled up to one of the women in the room. His low voice came through the speakers. You come around here often, baby. The girl tilted her head, confused. A few gasps sounded around the room. Someone dropped their drink. The volume of the music lowered. Joseph didn't seem to notice, leaning in closer to the girl. If I tell you a secret, would you let me kiss you? He didn't wait for an answer. You're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. My stomach twisted. He'd used that same line on me. By the rising rabble of the crowd, I gathered that I wasn't the only one. The object of Joseph's current desire scoffed at him, and Joseph finally started to look around. Eyeing the faces of the girls around him, recognition sparked on his features. His eyes went wide. He started for the door, but his movement slowed. Sluggish. He dropped the drink he'd been holding. It splashed across the carpet. He's not going anywhere, Asher said. I looked at him. Did you drug his drink? Asher didn't deny it. Many girls closed in around Joseph, voices rising. The earlier laughter had entirely vanished. Now there was only arguing, shouting, fundy anger. I'm his girlfriend, one girl yelled. Number I am, said another. Who are these women, Joseph? One screamed in Joseph's face, voice echoing through the speakers. Who are we? Someone replied. Who are you? Yet the chaos cleared quickly. The more they argued, I expected the girls to start fighting each other, but to my surprise they almost seemed to rally together against a common enemy, Joseph, the man who had lied to each and every one of them. One girl slapped Joseph clean across his face, leaving an ugly red mark on his cheek. I moved without thinking. My hatred powered my legs as I walked forward, pressing through the crowd. When I reached Joseph, he was barely holding himself upright. Cynthia, he said, voice shaking and pathetic. Cynthia, please, mercy, please. Where was his mercy when he had shoved me down to the ground? When he had screamed in my face? When he had threatened our child? He would find no mercy here. I grabbed his shoulders and dug my fingernails into his skin, just as he had done to me. I leaned close to him and he whimpered. This is my revenge, I said into his ear. Then I kneed in him firm in the asterisk. He sucked in a sharp breath and collapsed. I stepped backwards, disappearing into the crowd. Other girls quickly took my place. Asher found me in an instant. With his hand on the small of my back, he guided me toward the exit. In Asher's dorm room, I sat at his desk and scrolled through the school forums. Posts were already flooding in, reporting on Joseph's many infidelities. Some threads were going viral, with hundreds of responses by the minute. Some had pictures. Aggrieved girls posted every ugly picture of Joseph they could find with cutting captions like, I can't believe I wasted time on this trash. Soon, videos poured in from the party. A few girls had kicked him when Joseph was down. Another gave him a black eye when he tried to stand. He eventually slunk away to jeers and mocking laughter, to nurse his wounds in some secret corner alone. It felt like a victory, like revenge, properly delivered, and it was all thanks to Asher. Asher stood in the center of the room, watching me or watching the screen over my shoulder. I couldn't tell which. I owed him a proper thank you. Maybe more than that. So I stood and turned to him. I misunderstood you. Everyone said you were cold and distant, but Dylan wouldn't be friends with someone like that. I'm sorry I doubted you. Licking my lips, I chanced a glance upward. Thank you for being like my big brother. Asher's persistent silence became unnerving. Big brother, he echoed, brow raising. He closed the distance between us in 2 large strides. I was very still as he lifted a hand. Gently, he tucked a stray hair behind my ear. His fingertips trailed down the side of my neck. Feather. Light. Cynthia. His low, steady voice sent shivers down my spine. I don't want to be your big brother. throat suddenly dry. I swallowed firm. "Then what do you want?" I whispered. I didn't want to break the spell that kept his hand pressed softly to the corner of my neck and shoulder. This was so unlike the Asher I had assumed him to be. Where was the usual distance he kept? But then, nothing else about tonight had been ordinary. Why should this, Asher? I was afraid he wouldn't answer. Please don't shut me out now. The ice in his blue eyes thawed. Let me be the father of your child. Wide-eyed and breathless, I stared at Asher. He couldn't have meant what he said. He really wanted to be the father of my baby. How? He didn't even like me. No. There had to be another explanation. What does that mean? I asked, shaken. I made a promise to Dylan to take care of you, Asher said. This is me keeping that promise. My thoughts were trapped inside a fog of surprise and confusion. I could barely process what he was offering. I was incredibly grateful to him for being willing to step up in my time of need. But this felt like too much. We barely knew each other. I didn't know how to say that, so I just stood there, gaping at him. I can be the child's godfather, Asher continued, shrugging slightly. You'll need help since you're still just a kid yourself. At once, my mind cleared and I realized his true intentions. His offer had not been made out of any kindness or affection for me. He thought me incapable of being a mom. I am not a kid, I said shortly, anger clipping my words. I've taken care of myself just fine until now. I can handle anything that comes my way. Oh, really? Asher huffed out a fake, harsh laugh. You call this taking care of yourself? I stood taller, insulted. What is that supposed to mean? He narrowed his eyes at me. Any hint of warmth that had been within those depths froze over once again. You are pregnant from hooking up with Joseph. You can't get more reckless than that. His words cut into me like a blade. Yes, I should have been more careful with Joseph. And sure, maybe I should have seen through his act in the first place. But Asher had no right to judge me, or to keep butting his way into my life like he belonged here. He didn't. We were worlds apart, son of an alpha and a top athlete. Asher was already well established within the academy. His life was guaranteed to be successful, and with the number of girls eyeing him whenever he left his room, he was undoubtedly going to be lucky in love, too. I don't need you, Asher. My voice was rising. I couldn't help it. He made me so angry. He should focus on his own life, his own future, and forget about me and my baby. Where my voice had raised, Asher's stayed perfectly level. Why are you being so stubborn? You are going to need help. I wished his FA would crack, just a little, so I could feel like he actually cared. I breathed deeply, trying to calm down. I'll take care of myself and the baby. You don't have to trouble yourself with us. I wouldn't want me or my baby to get in the way of your bright future. I'd managed to lower my voice, but a bitterness still crept in. I kept thinking of all those girls watching him wanting him. It bothered me more than it should have, for reasons I didn't fully understand. Finally, he gave a reaction. Frowning, he glowered at me, demanding an explanation without voicing it. I was embarrassed by my own irritation. But if he needed a list of all the reasons he should leave me alone, I had to include this one. I've seen the girls lining up to be on your arm, I said. Are you going to tell them to wait while you help me with a baby? He clenched his jaw. You don't know what you're talking about. Tell me I'm lying, I insisted. I waved toward his door. I bet there are girls out there right now just waiting for me to leave so they can make their move on you. He didn't deny it, but he didn't seem happy about it either. But then, he never looked happy about anything. Think what you want, he said briskly, like a dismissal. I will, I snapped. Fine. Silence settled around us again. I wondered if I should have walked out. But Asher's body stood between me and the door. He didn't move, so he likely wasn't done lecturing me yet. I braced myself, but I still wasn't prepared for his question. Since you are having the baby, when do you have to leave the academy? I froze. I hadn't wanted to think about that, but there was no running from it now. I had known continuing the pregnancy would have consequences, but how could I give up my dreams so easily? I'd worked for years to get into the academy. I wasn't willing to lose my best chance at success. I'll take a break when I have to, I said. Then come back after the baby's born. He watched me, brow lowering. Weren't you recruited as a cheerleader 3 months ago? I nodded. Then, you're still on your 6-month probation. The recruiters must have told you that all freshman athletes need to take the midterm exam before you become a full student. Asher, as captain of the hockey team, knew all the rules for athletes inside and out. I dreaded where he was going with this. I know that. But Tumbid, if you miss that exam, you'll get expelled. I swallowed. Firm, he asked me. You don't honestly intend to keep cheerleading when you're pregnant, do you? As a cheerleader, I knew the difficulties and the dangers of the sport. Even perfectly healthy girls sometimes got hurt. Twisted ankles and broken elbows weren't uncommon. Plus, with the exam in 3 months, I'd have to find a way to hide my growing belly. Before I knew it, Asher had his phone in his hands. The faculty advisor will tell you it's impossible. Let them tell you since you hate listening to me. He dialed a number, then held out the phone for me to take. It only rang twice before someone picked up. This is the advisement office, said a voice through the phone. I grabbed it from Asher and placed it to my ear. How may I help you? I was wondering about the athlete midterm exam, I said into the phone. I heard that there is a rule that if a student misses the 6-month exam, they will get expelled. That is correct. The answer came instantly. I clutched the phone tightly inside. I clung to my last tiny flicker of hope. Surely there were exceptions to the rule. What if something happens to the athlete? Like an accident, or they get sick and they have to miss it. Any problem that a student has is theirs to solve, the faculty advisor said. Stern. At Lunar Haven Academy, we only want students who can solve problems, not those who make excuses. Fear formed icy tendrils in my chest. I'd always considered this elite college to be perfect. Difficult? Sure, but never so. Cold. So unforgiving. My gaze sought out Asher. I knew he wouldn't offer comfort, but I thought if I saw his smug smirk, I'd get angry enough to keep fighting somehow. He wasn't smirking. He wasn't even looking at me, half turned from me. He glared at a spot on the floor. He was frowning. Was it truly hopeless then? I closed my eyes. I didn't want to accept defeat, but my options were so few. However, said the voice on the phone. I snapped out of my defeated thoughts. I hung on every word. Yes, the midterm exam is only one of 2 ways for athletes to officially become students at our academy. The words sunk in slowly. Only one of 2 ways. Did that mean there was another way? My hope flickered to life once more. Did I still have a chance? My heart kindled a new fiery hope. Completing the midterm exam with my pregnancy felt impossible. But if there was another way to become an official student at Lunar Haven Academy, I had to do it. Whatever it was, I would do it. What's the other option? I asked. I pressed the phone firm to my ear. I didn't want to miss a single syllable of what the faculty advisor might say. The other way to become an official student is to take the transfer test that we have set up for athletes. Okay. A test. I could do that. Maybe. What does that kind of test include? I asked. The transfer test is similar to the one given to other elite students, the faculty advisor said. This is primarily an academic assessment. My fiery hope dimmed into a barely there flicker. My strength was my dance. I'd focused totally on cheerleading, not academics. I didn't exactly have the best grades, but if this was my only option, if passing this test would mean that I could stay, what choice did I have, miss? Said the faculty advisor, jolting me from my thoughts. If you are inquiring because you are an athlete who plans to miss the midterm exam, I have to advise you not to get your hopes up. My heart sank. Since the founding of Lunar Haven Academy, an athlete has never passed this transfer exam. Never. If that were true, how could I think I would be different? My stomach twisted. I only had one last question. I'd been hoping to avoid asking it, but now, with all my options dwindling, I had to be sure. What if the athlete is pregnant? That is a tasteless joke. The faculty advisor did not sound amused. Our academy is not a maternity hospital. Hanging up the phone, I handed it back to Asher. He took it without comment. Lunar Haven Academy was my dream. I'd worked firm for the past 10 years to make it a reality. This was the place I could prove my worth to my family. I could finally show my parents that I was just as good as my older siblings. My life was just starting. But what now? Would I have to drop out? Would I be forced to sacrifice my dreams? Now? Do you believe me? Asher asked, voice flat. None of this is fair, I said softly. I rubbed my hands up my arms, trying to give myself even a shred of comfort. My whole world was falling apart. This is an elite school. Nothing here is fair, Asher said. Aside from the athletes, only the children of alphas and academic geniuses get admitted here. I knew all that. And yet, I'd hoped. Face it, Cynthia, he said emotionless. Maybe you just don't belong here. I closed my eyes. The phone call had exposed my insecurities, and now he drilled into them with his cruel words. And the way he said them, like it was obvious that I was out of my league here. Maybe he was right. Maybe I never belonged here. Maybe I should just leave. Swallowing down my growing sadness, I said, I'll think about dropping out. The next morning, I placed my suitcase on my bed and began packing my clothes. I moved slowly, heartbroken at what I had to choose. But at this point, I had no other options. Taking a small break, I sat on the edge of the bed and unlocked my phone. I desperately wanted to talk to someone. My cousin Nancy was the only one I could turn to. She was probably still worried from the other day when I'd told her I was going to keep the baby. I hadn't talked to her since. When I dialed her number, she picked up right away. Are you okay? She asked. No, I said, breaking. Unshed tears welled in my eyes. I'd held so much back for so long. Hearing her kind voice cracked through all the walls I'd built to withhold my emotions. I spoke through sniffles. I'm going to drop out of the academy to have my baby. I can't do both. Oh no, Cynthia. To my surprise, Nancy started to cry too. You've worked so firm. You've sacrificed so much to apply to that college. If you leave now, you won't be able to go back. I know, I said. But Nancy pressed on like she hadn't heard me. You won't be able to juggle everything. Then you'll be trapped. You'll have nowhere to go. You'll be stuck with the baby and no life of your own. I pressed my lips, firm together, biting back a sob. I've seen this happen too many times at the hospital, Nancy continued. New mothers who can't keep up, their lives totally ruined by their children, and those girls weren't as young as you, and they had families to support them. She didn't have to say what we both knew. My family wouldn't help me. Meet me at the hospital, Nancy pleaded. Come as soon as you can, and I'll show you. If you see for yourself, maybe you'll change your mind. I didn't think it would change anything, but she sounded desperate. I'd never heard her beg before. I couldn't say no. I promised to meet her in an hour, and continued packing. An hour later, I walked into the maternity hospital and found Nancy waiting for me at the nurse's station. "Come on," she said, and led me toward the neonatal care unit. Through the window, I could see exhausted girls sitting upright in their chairs, holding their babies to them with shaking hands. Dark circles clung beneath their eyes. Other girls fumbled with their breast pumps, unwilling to stop even for a moment to rest. The nurses worked around them, checking on them and the children, but not forcing any of them to stop. "The mothers do what they have to do for their babies," Nancy explained. "We nurses can only respect their wishes, or we'd risk the health of both." I gripped firm at the window pane. Fear gripped my heart. This was my future. "Is this really what you want for yourself?" Nancy asked. When I had received my acceptance letter for the academy, I was so happy. I'd burst into the living room, where some of my family had gathered, waving my letter around like a badge of honor. I'd felt lighter than I'd ever had. I finally felt like I had a future worth looking forward to. It all felt foolish now. "I appreciate what you are trying to do," I told Nancy. "But nothing will change my mind." "Cynthia, please don't do this to yourself," Nancy said. I shook my head. I would not be talked out of my decision, even if I hated it. Looking at me, she must have recognized my resolve. She placed her hand on my arm and squeezed. We both turned toward the window and watched the new mothers for a while. "I have to go," I said then. She nodded. I left without another word. I'd already filled out the application to withdraw from school. The envelope peeked out from inside my purse. I only had to deliver it. With slow, heavy steps, I made my way back onto campus. I have to do this. I bitterly reminded myself with each forward inch. This was all that was left for me. Outside the registrar's office, I stopped to inhale a shaky breath. This was it. No turning back now. Reaching for the front door, I curled my fingers around the metal handle. Heart pounding, I pulled. Suddenly, a female voice shouted, loud and crisp, from within my own head. "Stop!" Listening to the sudden voice in my head, I froze. I held the door to the registrar's office, halfway open, halfway closed. "Don't do this," the voice said. At once, I released the handle as if it burned me. The door drifted closed. I backed away a step. I glanced around, but there was no one near me. There were no speakers on the walls or ground. My phone was tucked inside my purse. That voice could be coming from nowhere, but inside my own mind. "Who are you?" I whispered. "I'm Lilith," the voice replied. "Your wolf!" Surprise shot through me. My wolf. I didn't think I was special enough to have a wolf. Not every werewolf had their own wolf within them, and for those that did, the wolves never appeared until the person became an official adult at age 19. For me to hear my wolf at age 18 was unheard of. I was actively hearing it, and yet I still couldn't be sure I wasn't actually imagining it. "Lilith," I said, and the name felt good on my tongue. Something seemed to click within me. A sense of rightness sliding into a spot I hadn't noticed was empty before. My legs wobbled, weak. I found a park bench and sat down. I was torn between disbelief and wonder. People walked on campus all around me, going about their own days. No one paid any attention to me. No one could possibly have any idea of the miracle currently happening within me. How? How did this happen? I asked. "You called to me," Lilith explained. "I felt your intense shift of emotions, and then I felt the baby. I could no longer slumber when I was so needed. I'd certainly been under enough stress. Does this mean I can shift now? We are yet not strong enough for that. Lilith's steady voice brought a soothing calm. I relaxed listening to her words. Enough to believe this was real. I know what you were planning here, and I cannot let you give up on your dreams. I don't want to, I admitted. I trusted Lilith instantly and felt safe sharing, but I have to do what's necessary for the baby. I wrapped my arms protectively around my middle. Competitive cheerleading and dance was too dangerous for a pregnant woman. An injury to me could be deadly for my baby. I've always been here, sleeping but aware, Lilith said. I've grown with you, even if I couldn't make my presence known. I know more than anyone how much you've suffered to be where you are. That doesn't matter, I said, though I didn't mean it. The sacrifice hurt me deeply. I'm not yet at full strength. I lack the power to shift, but I am not helpless. I can protect you, and the baby inside of you. I didn't want to give myself false hope about what that could mean. I'm glad you're here, but it's okay. My voice trembled as I said. I've accepted my choice, liar, Lilith whispered. You cannot hide from me. I am here within you. We are one. I wanted to cry. Lilith, Cynthia, hear me. I will let no harm come to the child. You don't need to sacrifice any longer. You don't mean. You can't, Lilith. Waited patiently for me to gather my thoughts. Are you saying I can stay at the academy? Lilith answered, yes. Back in the safety of my dorm room, I ignored my half-packed bags still on my bed and called Nancy. My wolf appeared, I told her the moment she answered the phone. It said that I could keep dancing, that it would protect me and the baby. Is that really possible? Nancy gasped. Your wolf. Are you sure? At only 18. There's no doubt, I said. Her name is Lilith. In that case, yes, Nancy said. The wolf can strengthen the uterus. Even women in labor have less complications with a wolf present. Understanding the wolf would protect me at what would be my most vulnerable moment was a comfort. But not what I needed right now. But can it really protect us if I continue cheerleading and dancing? For a time, Nancy said, then elaborated. With your wolf, exercise in the first trimester of pregnancy is acceptable, though you will have to be cautious to watch for any signs of miscarriage. Hope blossomed anew within me. If I could exercise for that long, then maybe I could take the midterm exam after all. How do I do that? What are the signs? I'll help you, Nancy said, her own voice brightening as if excited. We'll do regular checkups. I can keep track of your condition and stop you immediately if there is a problem. Relief flooded through my veins. Okay, I can do that. You have to promise to listen to me, though, no matter what I say, Nancy told me. If I say stop, you have to stop. I understand. I bounced on my feet, not believing my luck. I'd been so close to losing everything and giving up. Lilith's arrival had been straight out of my prayers. I went from having no chance to being given another shot, unbidden. I wondered what Asher would think. Maybe you don't belong here, he'd said. I couldn't wait to prove him wrong. Thank you, Lilith, I whispered. Lilith's reassuring presence washed over my mind. I need no thanks. Cynthia, I want to make one last thing clear, Nancy said, reclaiming my focus. This is not entirely without risk. If your wolf is ever weakened, or if the movements are too dangerous, or if you overexert yourself, the child may still be harmed. Lilith rumbled, low and protective, in the back of my throat. I swallowed it down. I know, I said. I'll be careful. I'll hold you to that. After hanging up with Nancy, I returned the clothes that I had packed to the drawers of my dresser. Then, I grabbed my application to leave the academy from my purse. Lilith hummed in delight as I ripped the form into pieces and threw it in the trash. Now that I had a solution, I couldn't keep my feet from walking in the direction of the athlete dormitory. I didn't stop until I stood in front of Asher's door. I had no real reason to be there. I'd promised him that I would think about dropping out. But my decision ultimately remained none of his business. I told myself that keeping him in the loop might stop him from spilling my secret to Dylan. I also reasoned that if I didn't go to him, he'd just make his way to me anyway. I might as well find him first. Neither of those explanations felt like the full truth for why I was there. Fortunately, Lilith, the only entity that could call me out for lying to myself, stayed quiet, secretly. I wanted to tell Asher what I decided. I wanted to see what he'd say. Would he still offer to be the father? Did I want him to? My thoughts were tangled in confusion, and my heart was too tired from the recent roller coaster of emotions to have patience for me to figure it out. So, I relied on instinct instead, and my instincts whispered, Asher. Before I could continue second-guessing myself, I lifted my hand and knocked on his door. I waited outside Asher's door for a long moment. Had he not heard me knocking? Was he not home? No. I heard shuffling behind the door and lowered voices. He was definitely in there. I knocked again. Louder, footsteps came closer, and finally, the door opened. Asher, I have to tell you. The words died on my tongue as I took in the sight of him. Only a thin white tank top stretched across his chest. Aside from the straps of his tank, the curves of his wide shoulders and strong arms were on full display. My fingers itched to touch. Aggressive confrontation shut my eyes, but without sight, my other senses heightened. And I smelled him. His heady, masculine scent, like pine and leather thyroid, crashed into me. Eventually, my embarrassment overtook my attraction, and I blushed fiercely. It had to be the pregnancy, making my hormones run rampant. Asher was a good-looking guy. I'd probably react the same if it was someone else. I couldn't possibly be developing feelings for my brother's intolerable, obnoxious best friend. Ridiculous. I breathed through my mouth to combat his overpowering scent. I tried remembering all the terrible things. Maybe you don't belong here. There? That helped. Slowly, I trusted myself to open my eyes again. Asher avoided my gaze. He stood tall and tense. One of his hands held the doorframe, the other the door. He kept it close to his body as if to hide the room behind him. Odd. I'd been in his room a few times by now. He shouldn't have anything to hide, unless... Cynthia, what are you doing here? Did you submit your withdrawal request? Is someone else in there with you? I asked. Asher clenched his jaw. His lack of reply was answer enough. I stumbled back a step. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have come here. Why did I come here? I'll go now. I turned away from him. Wait! Asher caught my arm, his callous fingers curling around the inside of my elbow. You don't have to leave. His touch was electric. It ignited the remnants of attraction within me. My knees turned to jelly, and I nearly collapsed, but shame quickly followed. Here I was attractioning for him, when he had another girl in there right now. I yanked my arm from his hold. Cynthia, he started, but cut short when someone pulled back the door. The other woman was tall, with an hourglass shape and red-coated lips. Her shirt was unbuttoned nearly down to her waistline. Her short skirt left little to the imagination. She leaned into Asher and kissed him on the mouth. He didn't pull away, but he didn't press in either. He stood tall and tense, same as he had since he first opened the door. You owe me one, she said against his mouth. When Asher didn't move, she stepped back with a sigh. She glanced at me then, standing shocked in the hallway. She frowned at me. I wouldn't think you'd spend your time with a little girl like this. Her red lips pinched together in distaste. "She's different," Asher said, a touch of cold creeping into his voice. She scoffed. His eyes cut into her, sharp and dangerous. "You forget yourself. You don't get to interfere in my affairs." The girl paled at once. Then, huffing, she pushed past me and stormed away down the hall. With her gone, some of the tension bled from Asher's shoulders. "I could have left first," I said, ignoring the deep-rooted satisfaction inside me. The other woman had been dismissed, but not me. Asher shoved the door fully open and motioned for me to enter. "No," he said. "Keeping my promise to Dylan is more important than women." I entered the room. He closed the door behind us. Inside his room, his scent was even stronger than before. Why had I not noticed it last time I was here? I continued to breathe through my mouth. Pressing my hands to my heart, I urged it to slow. Now wasn't the time for this kind of reaction. I came here to tell him my decision, and I couldn't do that through attraction-filled haze. "Now," Asher said, "I assume you came here for a reason. Let's hear it." Asher's domineering tone didn't exactly quell my attraction, but it did help me focus. With that focus, strength followed. I faced him, determined. "I've decided to stay and pass my midterm as a cheerleader. I won't leave the academy before that." He furrowed his brow. "That is exactly what we agreed earlier that you couldn't do. I only promised to think about dropping out. And I did after more thought. I realized it would be a mistake. You aren't thinking clearly." He shook his head. "This is a childish dream, Cynthia. You need to face reality." "I can do this. Asher, I know you want to have it all. That's admirable. But it's not possible for anyone, especially someone in your state." "My state?" Oh, he meant pregnant. Yesterday, I would have taken his words to heart. I might have backed down in the face of his overwhelming certainty, but not today. Today I held Asher's gaze. I lifted my chin. He could likely tell something was different this time. He stepped closer, towering over me, but I wasn't going to be intimidated by his height. "Something could happen to you or the baby," he said. "Then I'll take the blame. This is my choice. I've already talked to a nurse. I know I can exercise during the first trimester without worrying." His frown deepened. "I'm so grateful to you," I said at once. "I know you want to help me, even if it's just for Dylan's sake." "I'm grateful, Cynthia, but I have to own up to my actions, and that means I have to take responsibility for the baby myself." "You don't know what you are saying." His hands closed into fists, then opened again, restless. "You can't play games with something like this." "I'm not playing games. You're just a kid, messing around." He was trying to get me worked up, saying that. I could tell. I wouldn't take the bait this time. I felt at ease with my choice. Maybe Lilith was lending me her strength. Maybe it was my own, I couldn't tell. Honestly, it didn't matter. Nothing he could say would get me to change my mind. Not even when he threatened, "I'm calling Dylan." I took a slow, steadying breath. Accepting responsibility meant also accepting consequences. I'd made my choice. Now I had to live with it. Asher, phone in hand, unlocked his screen. I placed my fingers over it. "Stop." "No," Asher said. Such a frustrating, impossible man. I shook my head a little. Releasing his phone, I retrieved my own from my purse. I said, "Stop," because I held up my phone. "I'm going to call Dylan myself." Dylan's number dialed. I pressed the phone to my ear. Nervous, I wrapped my free arm around my waist. Asher hovered nearby, close but not touching. At this distance, he would likely be able to hear everything said on both sides. Good. Then he would know I wasn't lying. It took several rings for Dylan to answer. When he finally did, he sounded pleasant, but not quite his usual fully chipper self. "It's great to hear from you," he said. "How is school going?" Okay, how are you?" "I'm great." "Well, sort of. It's nice to hear your voice." I swallowed, hoping he would still think so in the next 5 minutes. "Dylan, I really need to talk to you about something." "Oh, hold on a second." Dylan covered the receiver. "I heard mumbled noises but couldn't make out what they were. Sorry. Things are kind of hectic right now. Are you sure you're okay?" "Yes. But, I'm sorry, Cynthia. I can't really talk right now. If you're okay, we'll talk later, all right?" "Dylan," I tried, but jumped when a growl sounded from the phone. A smacking noise followed. Then a thump, as the phone hit something solid. "That was uncalled for," came Dylan's muffled voice. Then, louder, "Get back here!" "Dylan," I asked. But he didn't respond anymore, like he couldn't hear me. Asher plucked the phone from my hand and held it to his own ear. There was some more shouting, and Temventuzi was that a roar. Lowering the phone, Asher glared at it like it personally affronted him. Then he clicked to end the call. "I don't understand," I said. Fear prickled up my spine. "Is he okay? It sounds like he's in the middle of a war simulation." At my incredulous look, Asher added, "Part of the Silver Moon Academy curriculum is a realistic wartime simulation that could last for months." He frowned at the phone. "We shouldn't distract him. And you are sure he's safe?" I asked, worrying. It sounded dangerous. "He needs to keep his head on straight, that's all." Asher shoved my phone back at me. If Asher said Dylan would be okay, I believed him. The relief doubled when I realized I would get to keep my secret a little while longer. I had been ready to tell Dylan about my pregnancy, and I still would. But knowing I wouldn't have to for a few months yet eased some of the pressure in my chest. I would admit none of this to Asher. Asher slow blinked at me like he was bored. Then, without warning, he yanked his tank top over his head and tossed it carelessly onto the floor. What are you doing?" My face burned hot. I covered it with my hands. He walked toward his desk, where a shiny black suit hung on the back of his chair. I peeked at him between my fingers, at the shift of his shoulder blades, and the long line of his spine. My attraction returned in overdrive, even worse than before. So much smooth, pale skin suddenly on display. Every inch of it could have been chiseled from marble. Even the curve of his backside was perfect. If he was on top of me, I could dig my nails into his skin, and Tamdi half turning toward me. Asher tugged his pants lower, revealing the jut of his hip bone. My world whited out for a moment. I squeezed shut my eyes. Then, I covered them with both hands to be safe. He was going to give me a heart-aggressive confrontation. "I have a business presentation today," he said, voice deeper than usual. Or was that my imagination? "If I don't get ready now, I'll be late." "Why? You could have warned me," I stammered. He hummed. When I chanced another glance, his pants were on, as was a crisp white shirt. With deft fingers he fastened each button. Next, he slipped a deep blue tie around his neck and began to knot it. His long fingers slid along the fabric, twisting and tucking with expert precision. Every movement was made with purpose. Nothing wasted. I watched, mesmerized. I aggressive confrontation my thighs together, and choked back a whimper. He glanced at me with hooded eyes, peering at me through his long, dark lashes. I hoped he couldn't smell me like I'd smelled him, because there was no denying. I wanted him. Blushing hotly, I crossed my arms over my chest. I pressed against my aching asterisk, seeking a hint of relief, while also hoping to hide from him the way they'd fermented. He glanced down once, only for an instant. Then he looked away and reached for his suit jacket. "Why? You should have asked me before you starting undressing," I said, voice breathier than I wanted it to be. "I didn't realize. I needed your permission to change in my own room. You do, when I'm in here with you." His eyes pierced through me again. A storm raged there within their depths. Even though the rest of his face appeared impassive. "Are you still angry? I saw your bare breasts through your damp shirt?" I gasped. "You said you forgot about that." He ignored me. "Shouldn't you consider us even now?" This is firmly the same. Ignoring me. He slid on his suit jacket, completing his look. He was so handsome in that expensive-looking suit, I nearly started drooling. I felt exposed, vulnerable. My desire for him was so easily on display, while he gave nothing away. I wanted him to back me against his desk, push my legs apart, and slot himself between them. If he lowered those slacks just enough, he could take me while wearing that suit. If I reached for him then, would he hold me down? Clasping my wrists in one strong palm, he would demand, "Keep your hands to yourself." He wouldn't want to wrinkle his suit. Wait. I blinked several times in quick succession. Why was I fantasizing about this? I pushed away the thoughts, but they kept returning to me. I wanted him to touch me. I was hopeless. This wasn't just hormones. I was actually, honest to goodness, attracted to Asher. Was I in love with him? No, that couldn't be, but the thought shocked me so much the fantasy, blessedly, slipped away from my mind. Asher checked his watch. "I don't have time for this." His voice was even rougher than before, practically growling. He stepped around me toward the door. I refused to be late. I could only watch him, somewhat dazed. "Come on," he said, when I hesitated to follow him. "We can talk on the way. You can explain to me exactly why I should let you stay at the academy." Even rough, his condescending tone shot anger through me, finally dousing the flames of my attraction. Privileged, arrogant, overbearing bastard, let you stay at the academy. Like everything was up to him and only him. Yet still, despite myself, I wanted to convince him, and I wanted to do it without revealing the existence of my wolf. I didn't think Asher would use the knowledge against me. After all, he'd proven more than once that he wanted to protect me, even if it was only for Dylan's sake. But I needed to keep a card up my sleeve, just in case things took a turn for the worse. I trusted Asher with my person. I knew he wouldn't physically hurt me. Yet his constant domineering and condescending attitude made me unwilling to give him any more pieces of myself than absolutely necessary, which was also why I needed to keep my attraction in check. Asher glanced back at me from the doorway. "Follow me or don't." "I don't care." He turned and walked away, his stride swift with his long legs. Infuriating. "Man," I grumbled, but hurried forward. What could I do but chase after him? "Hey, wait for me, Asher." "Asher." "Asher." Cynthia followed in my shadow as I left the dorm and started my trek across campus. She jogged to keep up with my brisk pace. She wasn't going to give up, was she? With a sigh, I slowed so she could walk normally beside me. Last thing I needed was for her to overexert herself because of me. True to her word, the moment she caught her breath, she started using it. She seemed bound and determined to convince me she was capable of taking care of her and her baby. "You don't understand how firm I've worked to be here," she said. "I had no one except Dylan. No one else offered any support. Not the rest of my family, and I didn't have any friends. I had to sneak around to practice." I carefully schooled my face to show no reaction. Despite the rumble of anger inside me, I practiced at least 5 hours every day, she went on. Early in the morning before the sun came up, or late at night. Whenever I wouldn't be missed. In between was my schoolwork and my family chores. I never had a spare moment. Instead of sounding bitter about her past firmships, her voice remained strong, with purpose. I can't let those sacrifices go to waste. I'm not ready to give up. And who knows? Maybe the school rules will become more forgiving soon. Not likely. I didn't bother saying it aloud. I have some time, she said. This early in my pregnancy, cheerleading shouldn't be too dangerous. Especially not if I'm extra careful. Jaw clenched. I stayed silent. Sure? I wasn't about to answer. Why would I? Everything she said was ridiculous. Unlike me, she was not as talented at hiding her emotions, her entire face twisted up with annoyance. I ignored a twinge of excitement. Expecting a fight, voice raising, she said, "You think you can control everything, don't you? But Dylan asked you to take care of me, not lord over me. And since he's too busy to find out about this," she waved to her stomach, "then what gives you the right to make decisions for me?" Silence wouldn't cut it this time. If you don't need me to step in every time something bad comes your way, you can just say that. But do you really believe that you are making the right choice? I don't need to prove to you that I can be both a good mom and a good cheerleader. It is my decision, and you don't get to stop me. I'm not some kid who needs your permission, yet here you are, trying to convince me to give it. I opened my mouth, ready to snap back. "Don't," said my wolf, from within my head, stopping me before I could speak. "She's too immature," I replied in my thoughts. "She needs someone to remind her how helpless she is." "No," the wolf whispered, warning, "she'll hate us." So. Though even as I thought it, my chest tightened. "I don't want her to hate us," the wolf said. I frowned. "She makes me feel strange," the wolf rumbled. "I don't fully understand, but somehow I know we can trust this little girl. She's not as mindless as you want to believe." I huffed. Cynthia glanced at me strangely, but I just kept walking. Infuriatingly, she stayed at my side. "I'm not wrong," I said in my mind. "She is too young and too inexperienced to make the right decisions for herself. She's reckless with her well-being and unforgivably stubborn, and if I don't step in, then fine. We are to protect her," the wolf cut in, "not hurt her ourselves." My thoughts halted at once, as did my feet. Usually my wolf and I were in sync, in all ways. What's the compromise then? I asked in my mind. "Do not make her hate us," the wolf said. What difference did it make if she hated us? I had promised Dylan that I would take care of her, not that she had to like it. But, from my side, she glared up at me. Her pink lips curled down in disgust. I didn't like her looking at me like that. Sighing, I said, "I don't exactly enjoy being your babysitter, so stop," she snapped. I bit back. A growl. "Gently," my wolf whispered. "Just watch how you act," I grumbled. "I don't like when things get complicated. Complicated, like in my dorm room when I had changed, and her eyes burned hot looking at my body. She blushed so firm her face was as red as a tomato. My wolf hummed in satisfaction. She had liked what she had seen. I shook my head. Cynthia was my best friend's sister. Dylan and I had been near inseparable until Dylan went into the exchange program. We talked about our worries and our secrets. I knew how important Cynthia was to her older brother. When Dylan entrusted me with Cynthia, only I knew how truly serious he was. Dylan had already told me how naive his little sister was and how much he worried about her when he wasn't around. Naive. Dylan hadn't known the half of it. "Things won't get complicated," Cynthia said. I avoided looking at her again, as I went into the building housing my lecture hall. Leaving her outside, my presentation was simple, made easy by my preparation. I stood on one half of the stage, my slides projected on a screen behind me. On the other side of the stage, a group of my classmates sat, ready to ask me follow-up questions as part of the assignment. It did not surprise me to find my selection of classmates were the familiar girls who seemed to follow me everywhere. Asher's fangirls, they liked to call themselves. They wore too much makeup and not enough clothes, especially for an academic event. When I'd finished talking, they scrambled over each other to ask me questions. One girl jumped to her feet, hand raised. With her low-cut blouse, her bosom nearly bounced straight out of her top. Disinterested, I averted my gaze. As I answered her question, my thoughts drifted to a more perfect pair of breasts. I'd told Cynthia I had forgotten about seeing her chest through her damp, transparent shirt. I had lied. Would she have looked at me with that same attraction, crazed glance she had given me when I changed? Would that cherry-red blush bloom down her neck and lower? Could I trace it with my tongue? Asher, when she growled my name in anger, likely wasn't so different to how she'd beg me in bed. Maybe more lilting, more desperate. The professor politely cleared their throat, and I remembered where I was, standing on the stage, half firm thinking about Cynthia. I shifted my stance. No one would have seen with my suit jacket buttoned. But I knew there was no escaping my own shame. My own want. Cynthia was my best friend's sister. I shouldn't forget it, but I couldn't control myself. I lost control, like some pup. With my decision made and settled, I felt more at ease. I didn't have to waste any more energy worrying about what I should do. Now I could focus on following my set path, even more fully than before. Since I'd gotten accepted into Lunar Haven Academy, I'd spent most my energy split between cheerleading practice and falling in love with Joseph. And when I wasn't with them, I trained. While the other girls practiced for 1 to 2 hours a day, I had trained for 8. And my training included conditioning and stretching. But now, with my pregnancy, my body couldn't withstand 8 hours of strenuous exercise. This left me some free time I'd never had before. Maybe now I could truly experience real college life. That way, even if I had to leave later, I might not regret it. But what did real college life even mean? I had to give it some thought. Either way, I was determined to keep my pregnancy a secret. It shouldn't be too firm. At this ultra-elite werewolf academy, the everyday topics of discussion were employment, entrepreneurship, honor, duties, and chores. No one seemed to care about family and children. This disinterest would likely protect me for a while. In my exercise gear, I arrived at the gym and cheerleading practice. Not having been there in a couple of days, I expected kickback from some of the girls. So I really should have expected it when Elena and her followers came to greet me. "Cynthia," Elena said, sugary sweet fake. Elena and I were rivals. We'd been at odds since we met, where I had to work firm. Elena seemed to have a natural talent. She took every opportunity to rub in how much better she was at everything than me, all while pretending to be friendly about it. She should have been an actress. She was so good at pretending. After enough backhanded remarks, though, I saw through her. She only ever wanted to cut me down to build herself up. "I've been worried sick about you." She placed her hand over her heart. "We've all missed you terribly." "You are so kind, Elena," said one of Elena's followers. She never went anywhere without an adoring entourage. Today, she had 2 men, one on either side of her, looking at her with hearts in their eyes. "It's so good of you to worry about your fellow cheerleader," said the other follower. I barely kept from rolling my eyes. Elena's face was the perfect mask of concern as she asked, "Where have you been, Cynthia? I hope you weren't sick." "A small cold, it was nothing." I waved her off. I'm here now. She lifted one slim brow. A small cold made you miss 2 days of practice. That doesn't sound like nothing. She's lying, said the follower on Elena's right, leaning close to her. I saw her outside the registrar's office the other day. She might have tried to drop out. Oh! Elena rewarded her follower with a touch of her finger to his chin. He swooned. She looked back to me. Thinking of dropping out, Cynthia. Look how much weight she's put on, said the follower on Elena's left. He openly scowled at me, not bothering to hide his disgust. She's probably thinking of withdrawing for incompetence. She can't even manage her body, Elena hummed. In cheerleading, our bodies are our instruments. We can't let those instruments get all rusty and bloated, can we? No one wants to watch a fat cheerleader, said the left follower with disdain. Very true, Elena said. I restrained myself from wrapping my hands around my waist to hide my slight bump. I couldn't be showing that much yet. They were just trying to get under my skin. I didn't want them to know, but it was difficult to keep my lower lip from trembling. There's something else, the right follower said, brushing Elena's long, silky hair away from her shoulder. The follower leaned in and whispered in her ear. As Elena listened, her eyes brightened. Her lips twisted into a cruel smile as she looked at me again. You are such a disappointment, Cynthia, Elena said. I would have thought you were smart enough not to become part of Joseph's harem. My mouth went dry. How did she know that? But then, those videos of my revenge had gone viral. All Elena or her lackeys had to do was check the forums. Is that the real reason you've been gone? Elena asked, tilting her head. When you found out the kind of man he is, did you run away and try to hurt yourself? Her cruelty sliced me, but nothing cut worse than the lingering heartache Joseph had caused. Just hearing his name brought it flooding back. I had loved him, and he had played me. The hurt festered like an open wound. Elena watched me. I tried, but I couldn't fully hide my heartbreak. Poor thing, Elena said with false pity. Her followers laughed. All their smiles grew. How gullible, said the right follower. Did you think you were special? Asked the one on the left. Now, boys, play nice, Elena said, tapping them each on the arm. Cynthia must feel bad enough for being such an easy target. I'm sure Joseph took you for quite a ride. I don't know what you mean. I lied. Don't be upset, Cynthia. Who knows? Maybe you were different. Maybe he thought about you more than once. She shrugged. Then again, probably not. They were mocking me. Mocking my hurt. I clenched my hands into fists. I wanted to punch that smug expression clear off her face. But that would only play into her game. She wanted to see me lose my cool. She wanted to shove a knife into me, just to watch me squirm. So the only thing I could do was lift my head high and pretend right back. I gave them my biggest, most cheerful smile. Oh, Elena, you are overthinking this. I had my fun with Joseph, sure, but when we broke up, I wasn't exactly devastated. I've had several guys ask me out since then. Elena didn't miss a beat. Really? Name one, I shrugged, faking nonchalance. I don't kiss and tell, but if you must know, the reason I missed practice was because I was out late with one of them and had too much to drink. Elena's eye twitched. I said I had a little cold because I was too embarrassed to admit being hungover. But I wasn't lying when I said it was nothing to worry about. The right follower tilted his head. Is that why you were with Asher? Elena's gaze snapped to him. She was with Asher. I saw her go into his room. Under Elena's full frowning attention, his voice shook. A couple of times. You are really dating Asher? Elena turned her knife-sharp glare on me. Her anger fueled my spurts. We know each other very well, I answered. How do you know a senior like Asher? Elena asked again, more fiercely. I can't tell you that, I said casually, checking my nails. We're keeping it a secret right now. If looks could kill, I would be incinerated. Instead, I just smiled wider. If you excuse me, I need to get ready for practice. I pushed through the three of them. What difference does it make, Elena? One of the followers asked when I'd passed. Shut up, Elena snapped. Pride shot through me. Her jealousy was my victory. She'd tried to make my life hell, and I finally flipped the table on her. All thanks to Asher. I just hoped she never learned the truth. Since I had decided to live the real college experience, I started going to classes that I would have otherwise skipped. Like the one I currently sat in, Werewolf History. For whatever the reason, maybe because it was history, very few people actually showed up for it. Even I had only attended a handful of times. Today, the professor seemed to give me special notice. He called on me a few times during class, then asked me to stay after. You are a cheerleader, aren't you? He asked me. When I approached his desk at the front of the room, everyone else was filing out of the room. I nodded. He slid a pile of paperwork across his desk. It was bound with an alligator clip. I need you to deliver this to a tardy student, he said. She hasn't been in class for a while. She's fallen behind. He pointed to a note on the top of the pile where her name was written. Sir, I'm not sure I'm the best person to track someone down. I tried pushing the pile back to him. He wouldn't accept it. Cheerleaders are well liked. I'm sure you have ways of finding her. He removed his glasses and rubbed his nose. I'm giving her one last chance to come in and complete a makeup test. She'll need this paperwork. I still wasn't sure. If she doesn't come in for the test, she'll fail the class, he said. Guilt crept up within me. If I continued to deny his request, would he simply fail this girl? I didn't want to be responsible for that. Okay, I said reluctantly, and pulled the pile of papers into my arms. Good, the professor said, returning his glasses to his face. Now that I had seen him without, I could tell he had tired bags under his eyes. Thank you. I hadn't a choice really, so I didn't reply. Back in my dorm room, I opened the register on the official school website and typed her name in the search bar. Before I clicked send, I noticed that down the right side of the main page was the soccer team's schedule. I didn't want to think of Joseph, but talking to Elena had churned up some memories. I had loved him once, and it was difficult for those feelings to disappear overnight. No matter how hurt I was, how was he? Had he recovered from the night of the revenge party? Had he changed at all? Or was he still chasing after women and keeping them all secret from each other? I shouldn't have cared. I didn't want to, but I did anyway. A moment later, I found myself on my phone, opening his social media. I had blocked him after the party, but now I pressed unblock. His follower count was less than I remembered, and it seemed like he hadn't posted about any women for a good long time. Scrolling down, I found a cryptic apology post with several angry female replies in the comments. Since then, he'd only posted pictures of him and the team. Several were in-game photos of him in action. The comments had shifted too, now mostly classmates congratulating him on his soccer performances. The likes since his apology had steadily climbed as well. It seemed Joseph's reputation as soccer star remained intact. Oddly, the number of girls returning to his posts, liking and commenting, was increasing again as well. The viral posts from the revenge party hadn't been all that long ago. Did these girls not care about his history? Curiosity driving me, I clicked through to one of the girls' accounts. She'd reposted some of Joseph's pictures, coupled with captions of hard-eyed smiling faces. I scrolled down, revulsion rising, until a new name made me blink. A post read, Asher is the hottest thing on ice. No, they couldn't mean. I went further down, and pictures appeared of a man in a white hockey uniform. On the left side of his chest, an uppercase C was stitched on the jersey captain. Zooming in, I inspected the picture. He was wearing pads that exemplified his shoulders and arms. But even with that added bulk, I recognized the cut of his figure. His face left no room for doubt. Under his helmet, he gazed forward with an intensity I had come to know well. I backed out of this girl's social and found another on Joseph's page. It was the same. Mixed in with the posts about Joseph were many, many more of Asher. Picture after picture was posted of Asher in his uniform, cutting across the ice, making plays, scoring goals. A few had Asher with his helmet off under his arm. His hair was damp with sweat, his lips parted for breath. Each had its own caption. Asher is so hot. It should be a crime to be both so talented and so good-looking. Look at those muscles. Under that caption was a candid photo from the weight room. Asher stood next to the treadmill with a towel draped over one shoulder. Joggers hung low on his hips. He was missing a shirt. He glared into the camera like he knew the picture was being taken and resented it. The bare expanse of pale skin ridged with muscles, the curve of where his hip disappeared beneath his joggers. The ice-cold focus of his unblinking eyes. My heart rate skyrocketed so fast, I felt dizzy. If I wasn't already sitting, I would have fallen down. Before I knew what I was doing, I had saved that photo, and many others to my phone. What am I doing? I chastised myself, embarrassed, and closed out of everything. I pressed my hand to my chest, willing my heart to slow. It was just a few photos. There was no reason to act like this. Suddenly my phone buzzed and startled. I jumped up from my chair like it had caught fire. I can explain, I said to the empty room, though I had no excuse for saving so many pictures of Asher and not deleting them after. I glanced around, realized I was alone, and felt even more ridiculous. The noise had only been my phone, alerting me of a message. Yet when I checked, my heart continued to pound. The message was from Asher. He couldn't know what I had been doing, right? I opened the text with shaking hands. Meet me out front of your dorm in 10 minutes. Wear a loose dress. The text read, No, that was absurd. I wouldn't need to wear a loose dress for a reprimand. I plopped back down on my chair and called him. The sooner I knew what he wanted, the sooner I could be normal. You saw my message, Asher said, in lieu of a greeting. You said wear a loose dress, I said. What exactly are we going to be doing? I've made some arrangements for you at the hospital, he replied. You are having a maternity checkup. I froze. He set up a doctor's appointment for me. What? I managed. But he'd already hung up. I stared at my phone, unsure what to think. Why would he do that? Unless he was still trying to take care of me. But his dismissal last time we'd spoken had made it seem like he was going to give me space to take care of myself. Even so, I wouldn't turn down a chance to double-check that the baby was okay. My phone buzzed again, thinking it might be a follow-up from Asher. I unlocked my screen again. Then, I stopped. Under new message on the screen was not Asher's name. It was Joseph's. No, it couldn't be. He hadn't tried to reach out to me since the last time I had gone to his room, when he'd shoved me to the floor and wanted me to get in difficult choice regarding her path. Yet, there was his name, clear as anything. Fear stilled me. I wished Asher was here. I shook my head. I didn't need him to protect me. Don't be a coward, I whispered to myself. Did Joseph know I had just been on his account? How could he? It had to be a coincidence. Joseph wasn't some tech genius who could track my web activity. But why would he contact me now? My thumb hovered over the messages icon. All I had to do to find out what Joseph wanted was to press my thumb down and open the text. Yet, at the last moment, I stopped myself. Why should I care what he wanted? He'd made his feelings for me, and our baby perfectly clear the last time we were together. Asher would be here to pick me up soon. I didn't have time to waste on Joseph. I locked the screen of my phone. Joseph could wait. Quickly, I changed into a loose-fitting dress as Asher had requested. I pulled my hair back into a simple ponytail and stepped into my flats. After checking my makeup in my mirror, I started down the stairs. In front of my dormitory, I searched up the street to the left and to the right, but I didn't see any sign of Asher. I knew he drove a supped-up expensive motorcycle that was more wild than elitist. But it wasn't anywhere along the street. I stood there a moment, wondering if I should try calling him again. Then, the window of the car parked right in front of me rolled down. It was a fancy black car with a proud shining hood ornament. I didn't know a lot about cars, but even I could recognize an Aston Martin. Asher looked at me from the driver's side. "You coming?" he asked, waving me toward the car. I opened the passenger door and slid inside. The leather interior smelled like him, and some of the tension I didn't know I was holding eased away. "Where's the motorcycle?" I asked, teasing. Dylan had talked about how much Asher loved his bike. It must have pained him to be inside a vehicle for a change. "You know why I couldn't bring it," he said, voice flat. My heart warmed in my chest. Riding on the back of a motorcycle would have been dangerous. He was protecting me again. "Don't ask questions you already know the answer to," he said. "Okay." I buckled my seatbelt. He watched me a moment, then leaned over me to grab a second seatbelt hanging at my side. I froze. He was so close. His shoulder brushed against mine. His face lingered near the corner of my neck. If he turned his head a little, I would have no trouble leaning in and kissing him. The thought jolted me, and I pressed as far back into the seat as I could. I couldn't pretend he wouldn't touch him. If I touched him, my body might react. And this close, he would be able to tell. I couldn't let him know how much I wanted him. Yet, at this slim distance, even without touching him, I could smell him. The scent of leather had been all around me since I sat in the car, but the soft touch of pine and the combination that was distinctly Asher came only from being this close to him. He exhaled, his breath warm on the bare skin of my shoulder. I held my own breath. Then, finally, he pulled away and secured a second belt buckle at my side. "Double insurance," he said, satisfied, and started the car. To my knowledge, double seat belts did not come standard in any car. Did he have this specially installed just for me? The car purred beneath us. Asher kept his hands on the wheel at 10 and 2, but made no motion yet to pull out into traffic. His brow furrowed like he was debating something inside himself. "Asher," I asked. He looked at me, and the steady focus of his blue eyes held me captive. Asher in the flesh put all of those photos on social media to shame. "Are you afraid of me, Cynthia?" "What?" I whispered in disbelief. Had he mistaken my arousal for fear? No, "Good," he said, even though he frowned. "Anxiety can be detrimental to the development of the baby. I wouldn't want to." Clearing his throat, he looked back to the road. "You need to be careful." "I will," I promised him. The hospital where Asher took me was not the one I was used to, but a much more impressive high-end building on the other side of town. It mainly catered to the wealthy elite, with chandeliers in the entryway and plush sofas in the waiting rooms. With Asher at my side, we were led into a private room where a friendly nurse began an ultrasound. I worried my bottom lip, nervous, but Asher placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. I gained strength from his touch, enough to watch the screen when the nurse discovered the embryo. It was tiny yet, a small glob with a heartbeat. But to see it with my own eyes, and know it was inside of me, my whole world tilted. That was my baby. My heart swelled in joy and tenderness. My baby inside of me was so small, but I would protect it. I would help it grow bigger and bring it into the world. Tears welled in my eyes. Asher squeezed my shoulder. I couldn't read the look in his eyes, but under his gaze I felt safe and calm. For a brief moment, everything seemed so perfect. When we caught the nurse looking, Asher's hand fell away. The nurse leaned closer to me, as if to tell a secret, though she spoke loud enough for Asher to hear. Your baby's father is very considerate, looking out for you, protecting you. Those are excellent qualities in a mate. You've chosen well. My mouth went dry. No, we're not. No? The nurse leaned back, surprise and embarrassment coloring her features. Please forgive me. I didn't mean to sound it. Tell us about labor and delivery, Asher interrupted. We want to be prepared. We. Yes, of course, the nurse said, recovering her composure at once. As she spoke, I dared a sideways glance at Asher. Concentration firmed his features as he listened carefully to the nurse. He nodded at certain times and asked questions. He was looking out for me. Even here, for the first time, I envied the woman who would someday become the mother of his real children. If he was this dedicated to me, just because Dylan asked him to be, I could only imagine how fiercely he would protect someone he actually wanted. My heart sank low inside of me. Though he was sitting right next to me, I felt suddenly alone. He didn't want to be here. Not really. I was just an obligation. I was only his friend's kid's sister, who had landed herself in trouble. He must have resented me for taking up so much of his time and energy. The nurse was right. Asher would be a wonderful mate, but he wasn't mine. I pushed the thoughts away. There was nothing to be done. He would never want me like I wanted him. Better to just forget it. After the appointment, we drove back to campus in silence. Asher dropped me off in front of my door, then drove away before I even mustered a thank you. In my room, I once again sat with my phone cradled in my hands. Alone with my thoughts, I could no longer avoid Joseph's message. As lonely as I felt, I didn't want to avoid it anymore either. Asher would only ever view me as a kid sister. But Joseph, I once thought we had something more. And though he had betrayed my trust in him, we were still having a child together. Wouldn't that forever bind us? The thought did not offer me the comfort I thought it would. Maybe he just wants to tell me off again, I reasoned, firming myself in preparation for an onslaught of insults. I clicked open the message. It read, I'm sorry, I never should have acted that way. I was out of line. I swallowed firm. Kindness was worse than insults. I ached all over with want. This is what it should have been from the start. Tears slid down my cheeks as I read the last sentence of the text. Can we talk again about our baby?